It's been a while since Monsgeek first introduced their M1 and M1W keyboards, which offered good value for an all-aluminum keyboard that was easy to customize. Fast forward a few generations and we've got this keyboard here, the M1 V5 with VIA compatibility. It's got the wireless connections, aluminum build, the exploded 75% layout, but this 5th generation now also includes a ball catch assembly for even easier customization. Let's take a closer look and see if V5 is the one for you. Before we dive in, I want to mention that Monsgeek sent me the M1 V5 for the purpose of reviewing it. I was not paid to make this video, and Monsgeek has no input on my review. I do have an affiliate link in the description for you if you're interested in picking up the M1 V5 and you'd like to support this channel. Like they've done in the past, Monsgeek has 2 versions of the M1 V5. This version here is the VIA compatible version, which they offer in either bare bones or fully assembled options. They also offer a version that uses Monsgeek Driver, their software, instead of VIA for customization, which is only available fully assembled, at least currently, but it still has the wireless connections and the same battery capacity. Monsgeek sent me the bare bones version and a set of their new rosewood linear switches, and I finished off the build here with just a set of die-sub PBT keycaps that I had laying around, so I won't really be commenting on those keycaps because I supplied them. Let's dive into the features and specs of the VIA version here, and then we'll do our sound test and talk pros and cons. The Monsgeek M1 V5 is a 75% keyboard with 82 keys, an encoder knob, and an ANSI layout. However, there is also an ISO option available. The construction is full aluminum for the top and bottom of the case. There are currently 2 case color options, black and white. The dimensions are 333 by 146 millimeters with a front height of 21.5 millimeters and a rear height of 34 millimeters without the keycaps. The fully assembled weight is 1,775 grams or 3.9 pounds. The typing angle is 6 degrees and there are no adjustable feet, but that is common for keyboards of this style. Connectivity includes Bluetooth for 3 devices with 125 Hz polling, 2.4 GHz with 1000 Hz polling, and USB-C wired also with 1000 Hz polling. The battery capacity is 8,000 mAh from 2 4,000 mAh battery cells. A battery level indicator is available by pressing function and the spacebar. The mode switch is located under the caps lock key. The top position is wireless Mac mode, the center position is wired Windows mode, and the bottom position is wireless Windows mode. Internals include a hot swappable PCB compatible with 3 and 5 pin switches, a polycarbonate plate, and silicone gasket mount. There's foam between the PCB and plate, a switch pad, and thicker foam in the case bottom, as well as 2 layers of clear PET sheeting. If you go for the fully assembled option of the VIA model, the switch options include Acco Rosewood, V3 Piano Pro, and Creamy Purple Pro. The model I'm reviewing was the bare bones option, which I completed with a set of Acco Stellar Rose switches. The fully assembled version has different color theme and keycap options, including white on black ASA profile keycaps and cherry profile gray and black keycaps. Backlighting is full south-facing RGB with 16 modes which can be controlled with key commands and in the VIA web app. The VIA-compatible version can be customized with the web app on Windows, Mac, and Linux. There's also a version that uses Monsgeek Driver rather than VIA. The M1 V5 is available from Monsgeek for $89 US for the barebones option and anywhere from $109.95 to $129.95 for a pre-built option. All right, now let's get into some pros and cons for the M1 V5. First up, let's talk about one of the new features in the V5, the easy disassembly. It's as easy as removing the encoder knob here and then pulling up on the outside of the case while pushing down on a couple of keys, and the top will pop right off. There you go, now you're into the case. Now, it's not so loose that will just come off when you don't want it to, but this is way quicker than having to remove a bunch of screws to get into the case, which is great because Monsgeek's keyboards have always been sort of aimed at enthusiasts that want to open up their keyboards and tinker around with them, whether it's just to remove the foams or play around with the foams or to do modifications like force breaks, tape mods, all of that kind of stuff. So it's great to see them evolve into what's becoming a more popular now, which is the ball catch style assembly. Now, another pro that's also an update from the previous version is the battery capacity. The capacity was 6,000 milliamp hour in the previous version, which was the V3, and now we have 8,000 milliamp hour capacity here from two 4,000 milliamp hour battery cells, and that's great because that just extends your use time even if you're using the backlighting. I used it for a week for my 9-to-5 job, and I had the backlighting on the whole time. It does turn the backlight off after a couple minutes of inactivity, but after 5 straight days of that, the battery level had only dropped one position to 90%. If you don't use the backlighting at all, you should be able to easily go a couple solid months here without recharging it. Another pro is the connectivity. We have 3 Bluetooth connections, 2.4 gigahertz and wired connections, and you're getting 1000 hertz polling from 2.4 gigahertz and the wired connection, and then 125 hertz from Bluetooth. They were all stable for me at usual operating distances of 2 to 3 feet from my computer without any physical obstructions in the way, so I had no complaints about the wireless connections. Next, we have the build quality. The aluminum case is nice, and while simple, it is overall very good for this price range. We're talking about $90 here, less than $100 for the bare bones version. So the quality, keeping that in mind, is great. We don't really have much of anything going on from the side profile or the back or anything. So if you're okay with kind of that minimal look, then the quality of the metal itself, it's all good. The next pro is, for this version at least, we have VIA compatibility for remapping and macro creation. Always a plus in my opinion. There is that non-VIA version available, but I always consider it a pro to have the consistent remapping experience available for Windows, Mac, and Linux without having to install any software. I did have to load the base map file, but once I did that, I had no issues with remapping. And one little bonus pro here is that you do have access to the encoder knob in VIA, so you can reprogram it to do something other than volume control if you want to. For example, you can adjust the backlighting brightness or scroll between backlighting modes using the knob instead of controlling the volume. I also like that Monsgeek is still including PCB mount stabilizers in the box if you want to swap them out. It comes with the plate mount stabilizers installed and lubricated in the bare bones version, but you can install the PCB mount stabilizers if you prefer. I don't have any major complaints about the plate mount stabilizers here. There was no excessive rattle here. I can also say that these rosewood switches they sent me are overall positive. They are not scratchy at all. The lubing on them seems pretty consistent. I didn't have any major complaints about them, and you can tell from the sound test, they're not super thocky, but they're also definitely not high-pitched either. Another pro is that there is an ISO version available, so the M1 V5 is compatible with a broader user base, so it's nice to see that both are available. Now let's finish up the pros with a comment on the overall sound, and then we will move into the neutral category, sticking with the sound, because sound is subjective. So the pro here is that there really aren't any negative sounds. With all the foams left in the case, there's zero resonance. I mean, there's nothing that you're hearing that is, you know, like a hollow sound. There's no ping sounds that are picked up and amplified by the case. And again, this is with all the stock foams left in, but there's really nothing to complain about here. It may not be to your liking for your personal preferences, and then that will move us into the neutral category here. So we'll keep talking about things that are very subjective that some people will think are pros and some people will think are cons. So my concluding comment on the sound is, without anything really bad to say about the sound, it's just up to your personal taste. And also, you're gonna get a different sound depending on which option you go with. If you go with one of the pre-built options, or if you get bare bones and do your own switches and keycaps, those factors really change the way the keyboard sounds. So unless you build it exactly the way I did, yours will sound a little different. All right, let's move on to another neutral item, and that is the feel, which is also very subjective. There's one little item here that I do consider a con about the feel, but we'll get to that in the cons. But as far as the subjective aspects go and the overall feel, with all the foams left in, the polycarbonate plate and gasket mounts offer a cushioned but not bouncy feel. There's not much movement here because the gaskets are silicone socks. They're not particularly thick or squishy. If you do take the foams out under the PCB, then you're gonna get more movement here. My point here is it's definitely not super firm with all the foams in, but also definitely not as bouncy as something like, say, a Keychron Q1, which has foam gaskets that really allow a lot of up and down movement. So cushioned, I would go with to describe it overall, but not overly flexible or bouncy especially with all of those foams in there. Next, in the neutral category, we have the design. They removed the side accents, as I mentioned earlier, that were present on previous versions. So the design is even more simple now, which I did mention this earlier, but it really belongs in the neutral category because whether you like this design, whether this sort of minimal case design is what you're looking for, totally up to your subjective personal taste and what you're looking for. The last thing I'll mention in the neutral category is the mode switch that is under the caps lock key. With the original M1W, I counted this as a con, but that switch was even smaller than this one and was very hard to use with your finger. You needed to use something else to really hit that switch. I don't personally like to remove a keycap for switching between Windows and Mac modes, but at least the V5 has a switch you can reach and operate with your finger. Now, if you leave it in the same mode all the time, then none of this is gonna bother you, but if you do switch between Mac and Windows modes regularly like I do, it does kind of get old that you have to remove a keycap. Okay, now let's consider a few cons here. Now, I do have a couple of complaints here, but there is one thing I experienced that was odd with the M1 V5 that might just be my unit. We'll get to that in just a second. Let's start by talking about the knob. Monsgeek made a point on their website about the knob being upgraded to resolve an issue that users reported with the previous version. Specifically, the issue was contact with the top of the case when you turn the knob, which can of course scratch the finish, so that's not a good thing. Now, while I did not experience any case contact issues while turning the knob, there's still a small issue here, and that's that if you press the knob, you can actually still have case contact if you're not centered on the knob. When you press it from the center, you will just hear the sound of that button being pressed. But when you press it off center, you can actually hear it making contact with the case. It's not every time, but there are definitely still times that if you press it off center, you will hear the edge of the encoder knob making contact with the case. So it is still kind of a little bit of a design flaw. All right, the next con is the issue with the feel that I alluded to earlier. Now, this only applies if you remove the foam from under the PCB. So it's not a huge deal unless you really want to remove that foam to get more flex. You're gonna find that there is varying levels of flex with that foam removed. It just has to do with the positions of where those gasket mounts are. You're gonna see lots of movement in the corners, you're gonna see less movement in the middle, and then even as you move left to right, like I said, you're gonna see varying amounts of flex. The main thing I'm noticing is with my left hand, I feel more up and down movement. With my right hand, it feels more localized. So yeah, overall, it's just not a very even feel when you remove that foam, which is unfortunate. All right, now let's talk about that weird issue that I had with my unit here. And it could just be an issue with this one, which I kind of hope it is, or it could be something with the design. I did some poking around and I did not see any obvious physical cause for the issue, but the knob does have its own circuit board here that's not part of the main PCB. So I'm not sure if there's something off in the wiring or the ribbon cable or what, but I had random ghost inputs for the volume control, which I left assigned to the knob. I would just be hitting a key, any key, there didn't seem to be a pattern to it, and suddenly my volume would adjust, usually down, at the same time that one of my key presses was registering. It happened on all the connection modes, including the wired connection, so it was not an issue caused by the wireless connections. On average, this happened to me about 3 times per day over the last week, and like I said, there did not seem to be a particular key or string of keys that was causing it, so ultimately I hope it's just an issue with my unit, but I of course had to mention it just in case it does happen on more. All right, now my last con isn't really a con, it's more what you would call a wish list item, and you may not care at all if you're not going to open this keyboard up and do anything to it. But the con here is that while the case is super quick and easy to disassemble thanks to the ball catch assembly, there is still a wired PCB connection. There's actually 3 connections here. You have 2 small wiring harnesses from the batteries, and then you have a ribbon cable for the encoder knob. So you got 3 wired connections that you have to disconnect and reconnect if you're taking the whole PCB assembly out, which you do have to disconnect just to remove the foam because the wires go through the foam. Again, the more of a wish list item, not really a con, but one of the things that some recent keyboards have been adopting, in addition to the ball catch assembly, is a magnetic PCB connector, so that basically you just set the PCB down, it connects magnetically to a little multi-pin connector in the center of the case. Just a wish list item. Would love to have seen that magnetic connector in there in addition to the ball catch assembly. So we're left with considering the price here and if the M1 V5 is worth it. The bare bones price is $89.99 and the pre-built price depends on your switch selection, but it could be as little as a $109.99 US, with these rosewood switches. I think it might go up to $129 depending on the options that you pick. Now for that price, the feature set that you're getting, I think, is definitely a good value, including the build quality, the wireless connectivity, the battery capacity. All of those features are a good value for a price below $130. And really, it's just a matter of a couple of things. Number one, if any of the cons kind of are a bigger deal for you personally, then that would probably rule this keyboard out. The question mark for me is I don't know if the little sort of bug that I experienced with the random volume adjustments happening, if that was just a specific physical like wiring or firmware issue with my unit, or if it's something that is a larger issue. Because I don't know the answer to that, it makes it hard for me to say whether that's a deal breaker or not. So that'll do it for this video. Let me know what you thought of the M1 V5, and let me know if you picked one up for yourself and how you're liking it, especially if you're experiencing that bug that I had with the random volume inputs. Don't forget to subscribe to the Semi-Pro Tech & Gear channel, and while you're here, check out one of these videos. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thanks everybody. See you next time.